tells us what they're thinking. This week, policy researcher from the Show Me Institute, Graham Renz. Graham, welcome back.
It's a pleasure to be here, McGraw.
All right, what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about special sales tax districts. Particularly, we're going to talk about transportation development districts and what are known as community improvement districts.
All the things where our eyes gloss over because we have no idea what they mean.
More or less, yeah. Names are not so important, but what's important is what we're seeing these districts do to sales tax rates in Missouri. We've all been to the Chesterfield Valley. We've likely shopped there. We know it. What we don't know is that when we shop there, we're paying extra sales taxes.
Right.
Those extra sales taxes, in this particular case, we're going to fund a variety of improvements. Many of them were completed, many of them not. But now what's happening is that there's a proposal to extend those special taxes to help subsidize an ice rink. This is simply, I think, a case of corporate welfare, but what's unfortunate is that this isn't the only case of these kinds of districts. There's more than 500 across the state. 20 years ago, in 1997, there were none of these districts.
So these community improvement districts is a tax put on by the people who shop in the area or in a development to develop the development in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. It's not proposed by the shoppers necessarily. It's usually proposed by a developer or residents, if there are any residents in the district. And so what they more or less do is they can start a petition, they draw lines on a map. They say we're going to impose an extra sales tax or maybe a property tax in this area, and it's going to go back to the developer, to the property owners, or what have you, to help pay for improvements. Those improvements could be anything from flower pots to extra trash cans to helping subsidize your parking lot or help pay a developer to improve the site that he's going to build on.
So let's stick with the CIDs, the Community Improvement Districts. Were these voted on by the people at one point and then continued on, or were they put on by the city council of whichever town?
Yeah, it's a good question. It differs. It differs in some cases. But what we see when we look at most of these districts across the state is that the overwhelming majority are created by one property owner. So how these things work, how the statutes are written, if there's no voters in the proposed district, the vote to whether or not to establish these districts goes to the property owners. And there can be as few as one property owner. So what we often see is that one property owner, often a developer, somebody who's going to develop a retail shop or what have you, draws a boundary around his property, gets an extra 1% sales tax put on. Shoppers have no clue these things existed or that they're paying these extra taxes, and the developer, gets an extra couple $1 million to help pay for his project.
Now, John Oliver on HBO did sort of looked at this maybe last year, and something very similar where let me make sure I understand this, Graham. You're saying that they look at a map and they can sort of create whatever boundary they want. So if there's a neighborhood that has 200 people, they can create this CID to avoid that neighborhood and carve out this so that only 3 people are in this district, one of which or 2 of which is the quote-unquote developer.
Yeah, more or less. It differs from project to project.
Right.
In the case of the Chesterfield Valley, that's a transportation development district. More or less so. The whole shopping valley, the whole retail, Boone's Crossing exit, that's all in this district. And then there's about 100 houses. Now that's up to maybe 200 voters, probably less than that.
Right.
That's pretty robust for most of these districts. Much of TDDs, and there's about 200 of them. Some 75-80% of these have one property owner. So
only one person goes to the poll and votes on that tax.
Well, no, it's not a person. It's the property owner, the developer, who's going to get those tax proceeds. So we're used to hearing things like TIF and abatement. These are the other acronyms that are out there, right? Other subsidies. Those kinds of subsidies divert tax revenue, and that's gotten them a really bad name, right? So we hear a lot about those, but
right.
TDDs, CIDs, they're not diverting revenue. They're creating extra revenue and diverting it.
Right.
more or less the same thing. It's a subsidy. It's corporate welfare, but you have no clue what's going on. You've been getting your pocket picked for gosh knows how long,
right?
And you have no clue. And guess what? You can't you can't say anything. It's not your city council you can go complain to. It's this. They've got a board. These districts will have boards, and the boards are often populated by developer appointees. So good luck.
And with John Oliver's report on this, you can go and argue whether or not you're for it or against it, but because there's only one person in this district, no one's going to go to the open meeting to sort of complain about it because you don't live in that district. You can't go and complain about it, right? I mean, the people who live in this fake district, sort of, no one's there, so no one goes to the public meetings and makes us think about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, unless you're a really devoted citizen and you really like putting the pressure on your government officials
Right.
or whoever, the members of this board, you're likely not going to go. And I spoke to a group in Cape Girardeau about these districts just the other week. They had no clue. They had no clue any of these any of these districts existed, and they're no different than most people across the state.
Right.
They have no clue. They're getting nickeled and dimed.
Do they ever go away?
They can, right? So some of these they can last up to 40 years. Some of these. But the only way that they can be abolished most of the time is if the folks in the district decide to abolish them.
Right.
So if you're the one property owner in this district and you're getting an extra 1% sales tax, you have little incentive to vote to abolish this thing. But you can vote to extend the tax. So, time comes up, you might want to fund a few other projects, you can renew this. And there we go again for God knows how many years.
So especially the developers of the outlets
Yep.
in Chesterfield Valley, you pay a higher sales tax in there, and that higher sales tax helps pay off the development.
Yep.
And so that tax stays on there for 40 years?
It can up to that long.
And so after he gets finished, or whoever gets finished paying off their bonds, whatever, that's just added revenue?
Yeah, for a lot of these districts, the money keeps on collecting until the time comes where voters in the district are asked whether or not they want to continue this tax or not.
Right.
So they can't go on indefinitely, but these things can really go on for much longer than a voter might have. Let's say there's one of these districts where there are actually residents in it. They may have approved it for the first time.
Right.
They might not know that in 30 years, developer is going to come up with a brand new idea, right? And he needs your tax dollars again.
So you said in 1997 there were zero
Zero of these.
How many are there today?
There's over 500 of these districts total. So, and when you look at the numbers, you look at the Department of Revenue numbers, the average sales tax across the state is going up with these things. So while you're only paying these extra sales taxes if you're in the districts,
right,
they're having a significant impact on the overall sales tax rates in the state. And what that means is that there are enough districts at 10%, close to 11% sales tax that is, it's skewing the numbers that much.
Yeah, the state sales tax is like 4.5, right?
Yeah. But when you look at you look at the county and the city sales taxes on top of that, you're looking mostly around 6-7%. But there's so many of these districts with close to 11% that it skews up the average so badly. So most folks are paying a lot more sales taxes than.
Do we have any idea how much money these tax districts have collected over the last 20 years?
Yep. So it's in the billions. The last statewide TDD audit that was conducted, it was in 2010. It showed that TDDs alone, so not CIDs, just TDDs,
which is transportation districts.
Yep,
right.
That's right. And if they're actually funding transportation projects, sometimes they're not.
Right.
$1.4 billion that they had planned to spend.
So $1.4 billion in sales tax was collected from the shoppers in all of these districts, taken out of the local economy to help fund whatever the developer wanted funded.
Yeah, so sometimes it also includes property taxes. So it can be property taxes and sales taxes, but that was $1.4 billion is the number that these districts overall were committed to spending. In their plans, when they got approved by voters, you add all the numbers, $1.4 billion, and that was 7 years ago, and that doesn't include community improvement districts.
That was 7 years ago that number comes
2010.
from. Wow.
Yeah.
So we can only imagine what it is over the last 7 years.
I'm sure it's crested over $2 billion. But again, the worst thing, because oftentimes there are no residents, no registered voters in these districts. There's very little accountability to the taxpayers. There's no constituents that are coming to your board meeting and complaining. So you can, these developers more or less get to write their own contracts, set their own terms, and we're funding it.
Anybody in Jefferson City talking about this or any type of?
There was some reform that happened last year because some of these districts, no voters are in them. To audit them, you would have to. The statute says you have to get registered voters to petition an audit. Because there's no voters, well then the developer's never going to audit himself. So there was some reform to get the state auditor has the power to audit these districts without a citizen's petition. But more or less, these things, there's dozens of them popping up each year. As far as I know, there's no effort to really curb their growth.
Wow, that is really interesting stuff. Graham Renz, policy researcher at the Show Me Institute. Where can people find out more about this?
So I've got a blog that's on the website right now. It's showmeinstitute.org, and you can learn about all these scary things sprouting up all over the state.
Wow, that is, and it's not just here in Missouri. It's all over the country they're doing this.
Yeah, so the TDDs, the transportation ones, Missouri is one of 4 states with laws that allow for their creation, but every state, including Missouri, has community improvement districts, sometimes known as business improvement districts.
Wow, that is really good stuff. Graham Renz, good job. Policy researcher, Show Me Institute. The website, one more time?
Showmeinstitute.org.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, McGraw.
848, Big 550.